This is Professor Prabhagar, Dean of Languages, Manonmaniyam Sundarnar University, Tirunelveli. I am happy to meet you all in this webinar on critical theory made easy. Friends, the professors working in the universities of Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry wanted to make these pandemic days useful and meaningful. With the formation of an informal society for literary studies, we wanted to host a webinar on critical theory to make the students understand the important aspects of critical theories. At the outset, I appreciate and congratulate my colleagues for having shown all their courage and confidence to venture into this new attempt. I request the participants to bear with the audio-video quality of these lectures because we have some technical limitations. Only with the available gadgets like mobile phones and webcams we have recorded our lectures. As an introductory lecture to the webinar on critical theory made easy, I have entitled my lecture as Take Diversion, Theory at Work. Friends, all these days you must have come across this signboard on the road stating Take Diversion, Men at Work, which means the formal road that we used is closed and we need to take a diversion to travel by a new road which we have not traveled yet. Similarly, the literary experiences and the interpretation of the text, the work of art, all these years are traditional and we have analyzed and discussed the literary text in a familiar ways. Now the familiar roads are closed. We need to take a diversion and we must accept that theory at work. Dear participants, there are two different views on theory. Most of the students, they feel that theory is one of the most difficult subjects to learn and understand. Even some academics also share the same sentiments. They have a feeling that literary theory cannot be taught in the classrooms, and with this discipline one cannot impress his or her students. But in my experience of teaching critical theories in my classrooms, I find critical theory is one of the most interesting subjects which can easily be learned and understood by the students. And we can make our classrooms quite lively and interesting if we understand the basic concepts of critical theory. Let me begin with my lecture by defining a critical theory. What is critical theory? In simple terms, we can call theory is only a background knowledge, a system of knowledge. I want the participants to remember only this at present. Theory is a system of knowledge, and this is a common sense, the common sense of an individual, and it is constructed quite historically. And what is the objective of a critical theory? The objective of the critical theory is to empower people with a powerful tool. The tool, the ability to think and decide. Then what are the functions of a critical theory? In the words of Max Horkheimer, a German philosopher, one of the key figures of the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, he claims theory as a system of knowledge seeks human emancipation from slavery. It acts as a liberating influence, and it works to create a world which satisfies the needs and powers of human beings. So, in short, we can say theory is knowledge, theory is an empowerment, theory emancipates one from slavery, and theory, it liberates and ensures freedom to all. Theory, it positions society as the focal point and examines the entire material and spiritual culture of mankind. It also explains and transforms all the sociological circumstances that enslave a human beings. As I said, knowledge is power and theory is liberative. Knowledge, it empowers people with a powerful tool, the ability to think and decide. Theory, as a system of knowledge, it emerged in connection with a series of social incidents, doctrines, and movements. By social incidents, we can very well take the contemporary pandemic, corona. This corona is a socio-medical incident that forms a system of knowledge in every individual and in a society. We have to formulate this knowledge, we have to formulate a system of knowledge by taking into consideration the socio-medical aspects of this corona. And as a doctrine and movements, that we have got a lot of ideological positions of the society. It can be religious, sectarian, secular, or socialist. And therefore, a critical theory in general, it provides the descriptive and normative basis for a social inquiry. And by social inquiry, I mean a social evaluation, a social analysis which aims at retreating, subverting, deconstructing domination and aspiring freedom in all their forms, and freedom from all forms of slavery and freedom in toto. The nature of a theory, to be very simple, we can say theory is a systematic account. And literary theory, we can simply say it is a systematic account of a text, a systematic account of a work of art. A theory is more than a hypothesis, and say with our speculations that we move forward. And theory, it is a radical agreement or a disagreement over an interpretation of every social and cultural phenomenon. As I said, theory is the background knowledge. We have acquired and accumulated this background knowledge quite historically over these years. And when we come across an incident or when we comprehend an ideological conceptualization, we either agree or disagree with the incident or with the socio-cultural phenomenon. So theory, in short, it problematizes our system of knowledge. It is a critique of one's common sense. And the system of knowledge is formed based on the popular belief of the contemporary society. Every society has got its own contemporary belief. And for example, society can be didactic, A society can be highly moralistic, and the society, it can also be secular. And from the secular society one gets a secular critical theory, and from a religious moralistic society one gets a moralistic theory. So theory as a system of knowledge, theory as a background knowledge, theory as a common sense is purely based on the popular belief of the contemporary society. And when we say theory is based on popular belief of the contemporary society, it doesn't agree or doesn't mean that theory is equated only with the dominant popular belief of the contemporary society. There can be some avant-garde methodology. There can be some avant-garde ideology to the popular belief, and people may vary from the popular sentiments of the contemporary society. And we need to say, many students, they always ask a question: what is the difference between criticism and a theory? And what is literary criticism and what is literary theory? To make it very simple, that I can say, criticism is basically an understanding. It is only an interpretation of an experience or an event. When we look at a flower, or when we look at, right, when we taste a fruit, right, and we have a kind of an experience, we have a kind of an interpretation and understanding, and we call the flower beautiful, and we call the fruit delicious. These are the responses that one usually share with others. These responses that I would call is instantaneous, and it is based on one's immediate emotion. So criticism, right, criticism in the beginning, it is only an instantaneous emotive response to an event or an experience. And how this emotive and instantaneous response become rational? With the understanding of the concept beauty, one can make use of various agents and parameters to understand the concept of beauty and say what is beauty, why it is beautiful, and how does it differ from other objects, and how does it differ from other flowers and other fruits. If one tries to rationalize his emotional responses, which is quite immediate and instantaneous, this emotional response becomes rational. And I always say I always cite an example saying that when we go for a movie, we get an immediate emotional response to the incidents and the scenes of the film. And if we are all alone, that we need to respond, we need to share our responses to someone, and therefore sometimes that we pick up a stranger and say the movie is good or the movie is boring. And most of the time that we have seen people who come out of the theater tell those who are standing in the queue, say don't go to the film, it is boring, or they say it is super and you can watch the film. This sort of response is emotional and rational. If he sits back and if he analyzes why he calls the movie boring or why he calls the movie interesting, what are the elements, what are the features that make the film interesting or boring, becomes rational. Therefore, criticism is a rationalization of an individual's response. I want the participants to remember at least this time, criticism is a rationalization of an individual's response. From emotion, one moves to the rationalized perception. Then what is a theory? Theory is nothing but a generalization of individuals' rationalized perceptions. By calling generalization, right, again I cite an example, say this time, at the time, imagine that the time is 12:30 or 1 o'clock, and I ask you a question, how do you feel now? And how do you feel, and what are your biological responses at present? Some of you may say that this session is boring. Some of you feel that you are yawning. Some of you may have an irritation in your stomach, and some feels headache, some goes deaf, some even goes blind and could not see things properly. So these are the symptoms one have at the time of a time between 12:30 and 1 o'clock. And that doesn't mean that the lecture is boring. And if we organize these experiences and if we analyze them quite rationally, one can understand the participants are not getting bored over the lecture or over the session, but they are hungry. These are the symptoms of hunger. So we take the individual's experience, we pull them together, we generalize those rationalized perceptions of individuals, and we try to conceptualize them in the form of a generalized experiences, and that we call it a theory. So if you theorize what is hunger, and we can say hunger is a biological phenomenon which has the following symptoms. And similarly, the romantic love, that can also be theorized from by taking individuals' response and generalizing them. And by generalizing or organizing the experiences of many, it becomes a system of its own. And we call a theory is a system of knowledge. And by calling it a system of knowledge, theory, it is constructed against all forms of confusion. And theory clears all our doubts. And it provides a tool. And the tool is very much empirical and it is verifiable. And from this empirical and verifiable system of knowledge, one can get a tool to understand and interpret an experience. And similarly, we can say there is a system of knowledge, and the system, it provides a tool to an individual, and the individual makes use of the tool to understand and interpret an experience. Here, for example, say there is a conceptualization, there is an ideology, and which exists as a system of knowledge, and it provides a tool to the reader, it provides a tool to the audience, and the reader, by making use of the system of knowledge, by taking out a tool, can very well interpret and experience the literary text. The four factors involved in theory. Theory does not exist in vacuum. Theory is always interdisciplinary. Theory is an interaction between system of knowledges. And we can say it is a theory is a knowledge upon a knowledge. This is a system of knowledge which is constructed upon another system of knowledge, and by providing this system of knowledge, one gets in newer forms of knowledge, and therefore we call it a knowledge upon theory is a knowledge upon knowledge. Theory, it is always analytical and speculative, either in agreement or in disagreement with our common sense or the common sense of the society. Therefore, we call theory is a critique of a common sense, the common sense which has been historically constructed in an individual or in the society. Theory is also reflexive. It is a thinking about a thinking. And now I hope that I have made you understand what is criticism. Criticism is an individual response, a rationalized perception of an individual. And theory, on the other hand, is the generalization of the rationalized perceptions of individuals. Let me now try to make you understand what is literary criticism. So, whenever we come across the word criticism, it means that it is an individual's response. And this literary criticism, it is an analysis of a literary work. In other words, it is an individual's analysis of a literary work. It is an individual's rationalized response or a practice. Literary criticism is a process or art of analyzing, commenting on, or judging the contents, qualities, and techniques of literary text. And at the same time, this exercise is based on a systematized approach which has been provided by a critical theory. As I said earlier, the theory not necessarily be always based on the contemporary belief of the society. It can also be an avant-garde approach. So, if the popular belief of the society is secular, one can very well be so religious, and one can rather be attached himself or herself with a particular belief system and interpret a literary text. And during these postmodern days, one can be a classicist and one can be a formalist and interpret a literary text. This sort of rationalized perception, it is empirical and verifiable, and literary theory, as a corollary of a critical theory, is empirical insight. It is the body of ideas and methods used in the practical reading of literature. It is very importantly, literary theory, it locates literature as a system of knowledge. Here, literary theory considers literature not just as a work of art, not just an aesthetic experience, but a system of knowledge. It refers to other disciplines of knowledge that on purpose operate upon the author, the text, and the reader. In other words, we can say a system of knowledge, be it a psychological influence or a didactic influence, that operates upon an author to write the text, and also it operates upon the reader to comprehend the text. Literary theory has always implied or directly expressed a conception of the world outside the text. Therefore, the literary theorists, they trace the history and evolution of the different genres, narrative, structure, and discourse of the text, highlighting the fact that knowledge is a power. Friends, in the following tables, I have given the major ideological trends of the modern society from the ages of aesthetics to the present age of new aesthetics. We have traced the history of the ideological trends of the modern society from 360 before Common Era to the present. I have given the table, and the table is self-explanatory. It talks about the time, the period, the major concepts, and also the major thinkers. The first movement of the European ideological turn is liberal humanism. In liberal humanism, human is given importance. The experience of human, his sentiments are given importance, and the gods and goddesses are replaced from the center of the universe. This liberal humanism, it insists that a system of thought that is based on the values, characteristics, and behavior that are believed to be the best in human beings rather than on any supernatural authority. And man is fixed at the center of the universe. The Renaissance of the European, it revolves around this liberal humanism. And I have already classified this humanism into two: liberal humanism, secular humanism, and also the modern universal humanism. All these classifications and concepts have been given in the table, and this PowerPoint presentation and materials will be circulated to the members after this session. The second important ideological tan of the modern society is formalism and new criticism. Theory as a system of knowledge gets influenced by the changes that take place in the society. And the modern critical theory, they are very much influenced by the world wars, the claim of racial and gender equality, the democratization of universities in Britain and in the US, and by the process of globalization and post-colonial politics. When I say the democratization of universities in the US and Britain, the subject language as a discipline, or language as a discipline, was introduced in many universities, and therefore the literary thinkers and philosophers were encouraged to experience and interpret the linguistic aspects of the language. And formalism and new criticism, they emphasized the literary form and the study of literary devices within the text. And in short, we can say formalism, it emphasizes that form is the content. Neither author nor the context was essential. In 1930s and 40s, with the democratization of universities across the nation, they stressed the close reading of the text and literature as an aesthetic object. It is independent of historical context. The formalists and the new critics, they give importance only to the close reading of the text, and they keep text as an independent phenomenon, say free from the historical and subjective influences. The other major ideological tan is psychoanalysis, archetypes and myth criticism. With the arrival of Sigmund Freud's the psychoanalytical school and Jungian analytical psychology, literature is either considered as neurosis, a subjective sublimation in the words of Sigmund Freud, and as Jung calls it, art is a collective unconscious, and it is the product of a culture, and it is the product of a society. And being a cultural product, a text or art, it remains as a racial memory, and these racial memories are embedded or encrypted in the archetypes, the messages drawn from the society to the society. After the psychoanalysis, there is another important ideological turn, which is Marxism, new historicism and cultural materialism. I just touch upon the major trends in the ideological turns, because my colleagues would rather concentrate on all these topics in the ensuing lectures, and they would explain them in detail. And this critical theory again is rather a neo-Marxist approach. The very formation of the Frankfurt School in Germany by the neo-Marxist, they consider the culture, literature and media as a product which talk about the social superstructure. Marxism New Historicism, and cultural materialism put together, they focus on the representation of a class conflict. As I said in the beginning of my lecture, literary theory or critical theory, it liberates an individual. It talks about a human emancipation from slavery. And this ideological turn, Marxism, New Historicism, and cultural materialism, they focus on the representation of class conflict, and they work towards and they strive hard to emancipate human beings and ensure all forms of freedom. This turn, it consents to the social and political meanings of literature, and it tries to understand literature text historically and rejects the formalizing influence of previous literary studies. And this cultural materialism and new historicism, they insist on the textuality of history and the historicity of text. That is, the representation of history in literary text, and the literary text can be considered as a historical document. Structuralism, post-structuralism, and deconstruction. It is, in a sense, an extension of formalism, and this stand is devoted to their attention to matters of literary form. As said in the beginning, form is the content, and structure decides and designs the work of art. Formalism devoted their attention to matters of literary form rather than social or historical content. The thinkers like Ferdinand de Saussure's, the concepts of signifier and signified, as arbitrary and unrelated to the concept, the signified to which it referred. Post-structuralism is a reference to an empirically certifiable reality is no longer guaranteed by language, which means language cannot guarantee any certified reality, and therefore work of art is always in a state of flux. Derrida's concept of deconstruction, it argues that the loss of reference, it causes an endless deferral of meaning. Meaning is not definite, and meaning is always deferred, and meaning is always aimed at the differences. Gender, race, and the eco-criticism. These concepts, they revolve around the feminist and anti-supremacist scholarship. Gender and race, they discuss men, masculinity, and color in historically specific ways. As W.E.B. Du Bois says, the 20th century, the tan is a color line, and people in the 20th century gave importance to the color, the race, and their ideology is very much constructed on the concept of race. Both gender and race, they concentrate on identity and politics of representation. This eco-criticism, a new kind of aesthetics, is the study of literature, and it relates the environment to and the literary text as a study of literature and the environment, and it is interdisciplinary in its point of view. And finally, the modern contemporary movement is the new aesthetics and the digital humanities, presentism, new aestheticism, and cognitive poetics. The contemporary aesthetic, new aesthetic movement and this digital humanities, and they make use of the use of web portal, e-content, and positioning the text in the present e-context and present hyper context. And this cognitive poetics, it talks about the aesthetic and artistic experience as cognitive process of human mind. It deconstructs the boundaries between self and other. And friends, this introduction, why theory and what is a theory, I think might be helpful to you to understand the other lectures on critical theories. I believe the ensuing lectures will be very helpful to the students to understand the important components of critical theory. With this, I end up my session, and this session will be opened in Zoom for further live interaction. I thank the participants and I invite them to our Zoom session to have an interaction. Thank you all.